Welcome to Racially Speaking. My name is Ollie, and I go to kindergarten. Now I'm gonna start with a song. Red hat, white beard, twinkle in his eyes, and Santa was his name. Is his name? S-A-N-T-A, 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 and Santa is his name. Merry Christmas. That is the end of my song. Bye.
What's up, everyone, and welcome back to Racially Speaking, where we have real and honest conversations about race as it's viewed through the lenses of faith, family, and vocation. As always, I'm your host, David Phipps, and this is episode 20. Man, it feels so good to be back. I've been waiting to do this episode for a long time now, and yeah, it feels awesome to be back. I'm both a little sad and really proud that by the time this comes out, I think it'll be about 6 weeks in between episode 19 and 20. And that really is, I think, the longest that I've gone in between each episode since I started the podcast. So that's really just hats off to everyone that has come alongside all of our gracious guests that have come on the show and lent me some of their time and really just helped me get this going at a much faster pace, honestly, than I ever thought it would go at when I first started. I really didn't know what to expect. And most of you guys know that, for those of you that have been listening since the beginning. So I'm happy to be here at the end of 2021 doing episode 20. Again, I had no idea how many episodes we'd get out in just a year's time. But anyway, this is not only episode 20, but it's a special episode. It's a little bit more of a family affair, and we're doing something a little bit differently, which we'll get to in 1 second. Hopefully you guys, I'm sure you guys did, obviously, enjoy that that returning cold open second appearance by my 5-year-old Ollie that you just heard. He's getting really good at those. Enjoys coming on the show. Maybe we'll bring him on for a longer time frame down the road. But speaking of former guests, I'm doing air quotes, quote unquote, guest today is my all-time favorite guest and by far the most beautiful guest we've ever had on the show. She's rolling her eyes, but it's true. My lovely wife, Caitlin Phipps, and I'm kind of going to turn it over to her and she'll explain why that is in a little bit. So maybe thank you for doing this and for coming on.
You're welcome. I'm a guest in my own home. Feels good. And I would like for you to now refer to me as guest instead of wife.
This is how you do it. I'm in a onesie. You're wearing the comfy.
Yeah, definitely rolled my eyes about beautiful because I'm in a comfy.
Well, you are beautiful in a comfy, but this is how you do it. I think I'm going to wear this every time now. Will you wear the comfy every time?
I already wear the comfy every time I'm doing anything, so absolutely.
So yes. How are you feeling? How are we feeling? That was our anniversary yesterday. Not our wedding anniversary, but 13 years anniversary of dating.
It was.
Don't be tempted to go into the story of how all that unfolded. But we had, I think, maybe the most romantic day yesterday. We alternated being sick after getting our booster shots. Yeah. So that was lovely.
It felt really good. Mm-hmm. Felt very exciting.
And now here we are in our living room.
Yeah.
Post-bedtime. In our comfy and our onesies.
It's better than last time because the Christmas tree is up. Mm-hmm. But maybe worse than last time because we're starting at 10 p.m.
It's a little before 10.
So.
But it's like 7 for most people because we stay up to a ridiculous hour.
Yes, we do.
So, what are we doing here?
All right.
Why is this different?
This is different because I get to take over hosting. And I get to interview David, which is fun because, I guess if you would call a normal conversation an interview, I already interview David all the time. So y'all just get
True.
to hear, more of what our conversations sound like, and hopefully some condensed conversations that we've had over the 13 years we've been together and almost 10 that we've been married. I think there's been a ton of growth for both of us when it comes to how we think about race and how it intersects with the different parts of our lives, especially with having kids. And I've loved listening to all of the guests and their stories. But yeah, 20th episode, and you guys really haven't heard a lot of David's story. And so I have lots of questions for him, and it'll be fun to hear him be a little chatterbox and talk a lot more.
Yeah, not hosting is, I'm both excited and a little bit nervous. Mostly excited. I like not having to, I love navigating the conversation usually, but it's a nice change of pace because I've never been a guest before, obviously. But maybe slightly nervous. Well, I mean, we have these normal conversations, but also I didn't tell you what to ask, so this will be interesting.
And you told me I didn't have to tell you the questions ahead of time, so.
Yeah, I didn't want you to.
And I'm feeling a little silly tonight, so who knows?
Perfect.
All right, you ready, Jobin?
I am.
That might be confusing. I called David.
How many people are going to ask?
So it just comes out sometimes. I called David Jobin. I have since like 2009. If you watch the movie I Love You, Man, you might understand. But yeah, if you hear Jobin, I'm talking to David. All right, Jobin, you ready?
I am.
All right. Do you want to go personal first? Or I'm starting to fear that my questions are quite intense. Would you like to go personal first, or some stuff about the podcast? I feel like there's a role. See, I'm hosting, so I get to make the decisions. I feel like the role might be to go personal into the podcast because that's where the podcast came from. So
You're driving the ship. You're driving the ship.
So what do you think?
I can go either which way.
All right. Well, I feel like my first question is intense, but it is what it is. All right. So you are very obviously, if people have met you in person, you're very obviously Asian, South Korean. And yeah, I just wanted you to explain. I thought it'd be cool for you to explain a little bit of your background. And maybe even like explain when you realized you didn't look like your parents because you're adopted. And so I was just wondering what the experience was like of coming to know that like, oh, I look different than a lot of the people around me. Yeah. And when was that? What was it like?
That's a great first question. I don't remember an exact day or place or time where I realized I looked different or had different skin color than my parents and family. So I was adopted, for those most people know by now, but born in South Korea and adopted as an infant and raised in a white family. I was very young when I realized it, but realizing it and understanding the implications for that obviously aren't the same. So I would say very young, like lower school, or I call it lower school, elementary school. That's a great question. I'd say like fourth grade if I had to pinpoint that, probably a little earlier. But I don't think it went beyond that. I'd still very much, which I'm sure we'll get into more, still identified with white culture and being white. So I think on the surface, no pun intended, like I knew I looked different, but I didn't understand or really feel confident that I looked different. And again, I'm sure we'll get to that. That all came much, much later. But early on, I really can't pinpoint one time where I was like, oh, an aha moment. It just kind of gradually happened, and I could kind of see, I guess maybe I was looking at maybe family pictures or something. I can picture maybe the bigger family pictures of extended family that, everyone used to get taken that are hanging on like my grandparents' wall. And I think maybe I would notice in those pictures, because I'm an only child and we don't have a ton of family pictures. But the contrast was a lot bigger when I could see 5-6-year-old me next to 12 other white people in the family picture. So I think that's probably moments where I was like, whoa, I stick out, which was also true in a lot of my surroundings growing up in school and really every surrounding growing up.
Yeah. So, I was curious. I feel like it actually has been a long time since we talked about that, but I was curious if it was from something like that or if it was because of an outside source, but this might kind of speak to that. So you're from Norfolk, Virginia, the 757.
What?
Yeah, and you went to a small Christian private school your entire life up till college. So, I just was wondering, this is pretty broad, but what did you notice growing up about your experience there? And there is, just a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds, both in the community and in your school. So I'm curious about what you noticed when you were there, as a student, and also what you notice looking back now about that experience.
Yeah, so like you said, the small Christian private school I went to, I loved it. I loved mostly everything about it. I made and forged some really great relationships with friends that I'm still really close to now. Teachers were fantastic. So very, very thankful. And that my parents had the means to send me there. It was a great, great education, spiritually and academically for me, and has shaped me to who I am today. As far as conversations on, like you said, culture and race, stuff like that, I definitely now in my adult life see the inadequacies that were there. That's not a knock on the school per se, but it wasn't diverse. It just wasn't a diverse setting, and there's a lot that goes into that I certainly didn't understand while I was going there. But I was one of the only people of color there, and like I said, I'm adopted and raised in white culture, so I wasn't diverse culturally necessarily. And so looking back, I can just see how I was shaped and just not exposed to a diverse group of friends or cultures or people because of the privilege I had to be able to go to a school like the one I went to, a private school, which costs a lot of money. But I also, like I said, grew up in Norfolk, which the demographics aren't like it was at my school. And many people listening understand, this concept, but I really wasn't aware until much, much, much later in life of, I'm hesitant to say detrimental, but of how that shaping me, I think, made me start farther back once I got into college or the quote unquote real world and saw, that was a cultural bubble. Growing up, I wasn't exposed or around black and brown people. My friends were all white. I love my friends. It's not a knock on white people. Most of my friends are still white. Nothing wrong with that. But for sure, it is interconnected with going to and growing up around that setting. So, yeah, does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Man, this is harder than I make people do this. This is harder than I realized.
Should have let me show you the questions, I guess.
Man, all my former guests, if you're listening, again, respect.
Yeah, let me think of a follow-up to that.
Please. Yeah, I think I might have done, or we might have done a much better job explaining some of the nuances with growing up in the school when I had my old friend James McAdoo on early on in the podcast, and growing up at our school shaped him a lot. And I'm not trying to relate myself to him. He is a basketball player, basketball star. For those who don't know, like played in the NBA, like was a big time athlete. Very different, but as a black male at the school, we did share some commonalities of being just one of the few, two of the few men of color, people of color at the school. He had way different elements to navigate as a star athlete, but he very much was comparing growing up playing basketball and navigating the culture at a white Christian evangelical school, and then growing up in his neighborhood where most of his friends were, playing basketball with him, but going to public schools. And he lived in a predominantly black area when he wasn't in school. I lived from Norfolk. I didn't live in a predominantly black street or neighborhood, but surrounding was much more diverse, and the places I worked in the summers were much more diverse, and I had other groups of friends that were more diverse, but far more. But you're shaped by who you go to school with. I would say a lot more, middle through high school, and so I don't know. Maybe go back and listen to that episode, because I'm just now thinking, man, James's experience going there was really helpful for me even to understand, because he was also significantly younger than me too, so it was a little fresher for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's helpful to understand the background. Like, there's going to be a different culture in Norfolk than there is in Southwest Virginia or in the South versus New York City. And yeah, that's part of, I think, what shapes our viewpoints too, is like who we're around. So yeah. In high school, I feel like these are really intense questions, but maybe they're not. You don't know what I'm going to say. I was wondering, in high school is quite vulnerable. So I already know the answers, but when you were starting to feel, maybe middle school too, but starting to feel like othered because you did look different than a lot of your friends, and because you didn't have, besides maybe one or two other Asian people in your life.
So is the question when maybe I felt othered by maybe even those close to me, around me?
Yeah, or just at all. Mm-hmm. I would think that probably, unfortunately, comes from, people close to you not understanding or being educated in, but also just, people in general.
Yeah. I've shared some about this, I think, throughout the podcast off the cuff a little bit, but I think I remember a collective narrative that I experienced growing up at, I think we'll move on from the school after this, just because I don't want to knock on the school necessarily, but I think it is important, because I think in a Christian private school setting, it's important I still really believe in calling out stuff that is problematic. And I think it's important to pinpoint why it's problematic, because a white evangelical Christian school, private Christian school, the stuff I experienced, I won't speak for every person of color that went through there or goes through there, but it's well-meaning, and it's a lot more subtle, and it's not I can't think of things I experienced that were overt, like a racial slur in school. I don't think. And again, those are the kind of things that would be almost easier to talk about. Not fun to talk about, but a lot easier of this happened. No one can disagree that this is wrong. Mm-hmm. But from a young age, I was always picked to be on promotional materials, whether it's a photo shoot, it sounds glamorous, but a photo shoot or for a brochure or something, or interviewed about the school or stuff like that. I was just always picked. And at first, when I was young, I thought I was just, it felt special. It felt really cool that I always got to do that. And then from a young age, I do remember one of my friends saying one time, and I also was simultaneously picking up on it. I was like, well, I got picked again. My friend, because you got to get out of class. And so one of my friends was like, gosh, David, you're just getting picked because you're Asian. And again, that was one, I was still too young, still not really understanding what that meant. But, I'm 33 now. I still remember that. So it did shape me. Like, I remember being like, huh. And moving on. But, like, I didn't process that, or, like, I don't even think I thought much about it after that. But it compiles and comes up and is in my mind because that was true. Like, that was hurtful, but also true. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, that was not kind to say, but I almost hold the reality of the situation more accountable for it, but also, like I said, it's well-meaning. It's not like they were doing it to be racist. They were probably doing it to, like, to advertise, but also just they didn't think about it. Yeah. They're like, yeah, we need diverse.
Diversity. Let's show diversity.
So why wouldn't we show diversity?
Yeah.
So there's stuff like that. And then I've had conversations with, like I said, one of my very best friends I grew up with. I've had a conversation with him over the last few years. We've had many, many conversations, but, so we grew up together, and he, at some point, would refer to me as, I don't think of you as Asian remarks from many people, which that was often said to me. But I think it's important when it's from your good friends, because those are the times where you can, once I've understood more why that's problematic, I was able to, I said this to him, I was like, explain why it's problematic to say something like that to me or to other people of color. If for white people to say that to your friends of color, to say, I don't think of you as that, I just think of you as white. And so, if you're not tracking for listeners, that's okay. But it took me a while to understand why that bothered me. So that was said to me for a long time, and I would just be like, cool, or okay. Like, I wouldn't know how to take it all the time. But that's hurtful because what the subtext of that is you're accepting me as white, which you are taking as a compliment, but I'm not white. I'm not asking to be considered, culturally South Korean, because I don't identify. I didn't grow up in South Korean culture either, but my skin color, I'm Asian. People see an Asian man, and or boy if I'm in school, but an Asian person. And you're not seeing me fully if you're accepting me into white culture, and that's, all kinds of problematic. Fast forward today, I think a lot more people are seeing that now. It's said to my black friends of like, you're the whitest black guy I know, or, oh, so-and-so is black, but he's pretty much white. And so that was just all that stuff was completely normal to hear and to say. I'll even say, I'm sure I for sure would partake in that sometimes, even just in my mind, because I would understand what that meant of like, to our friends who, were black, like, well, they're not really, black. They're not in the hood, and they're not just all these offensive stereotypes. Yeah. Like, they're not dangerous, or they're not, they don't, but, just, I hate even saying them, but stuff like that. And so that was definitely something, it was like a bubble where stuff like that would happen and it was okay. And again, it was well-meaning, I think, for the most part. But that upbringing definitely shaped how I then, post high school, started to realize some things that were trauma to me as an adult. And then I'm assuming you'll go here, but we got kids now, and it's 2021, and I don't know if you've kept up, but stuff's happening that has forced us to be a little more informed than we'd like, almost.
Yes, to put it lightly, stuff is happening. And I mean, it's interesting because it's not interesting, it's sad. The exact same remarks were being said at my public school. Like, there wasn't a difference in that. But I do think it is good to think about, like, the implications of the same type of speech happening at a Christian school, because that would imply something about faith, right? It's hard because I don't think, especially right now, I don't know, maybe ever. But it feels like especially right now that, the church and Christian institutions, like, I don't think people are looking at them for the answers when it comes to, letting people really come as they are, culturally, racially, not asking them to assimilate. So, I don't know. I mean, that was a long time ago that you were in elementary school and high school even. So yeah, certainly things have changed and people are more educated in the way they speak, I think. I think it's easier for people to see why that would be problematic when we would have just said that off the cuff as 16-year-olds very, very easily. But it's interesting to think about, like, churches and Christian institutions having behavior that looks just like everything else, and what that says about the church. That's a much larger conversation, but just something, I noticed. And then just don't know how much time you'll have for all of this, but the promotional thing you brought up, I think, is interesting too. I think that's something you just shared with me even pretty recently, about realizing that. And it feels hard. It feels like it's one of those things that is a double-edged sword. Like, it's confusing to navigate because a lot of times people are not being malicious when they look at a crowd for a promotional thing and go, okay, most of the people here are white, but let me make sure to pick the people of color and a white person so that we can look like what we would like it to be like, which is, like, on the surface, that's good, I think. But under that, that's where it gets tricky. It's like, okay, but is the school or the foundation or the university, like, I remember your ridiculous grad school graduation picture was on a giant banner inside the dining hall.
I don't ever know if I saw that in person.
I saw it a lot.
People would send it to me.
Truly was 15 feet long.
Oh my gosh.
Like, it
was a fat head.
It was. Well, it wasn't quite a fat head because it wasn't stickered to the wall.
Oh, man.
And it was only torso up, but it was you either doing double peace signs or taking a selfie with your professor. I cannot remember. I think it was the double peace signs. It was you cheering after you graduated grad school.
I don't know how I didn't go see that in person.
I mean, it feels like a real miss, honestly.
That's upsetting.
Yeah. But there was an element of, like, I think that's around the same time we started talking about a lot of this stuff too, or maybe a couple years after. And there was an element of, like, I don't know how to handle it, but, like, the university was probably pretty pumped. They got this, like, really overexcited looking picture of somebody who was Asian, even though at that time there wasn't a lot of diversity at Radford. Can I say Radford?
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot of diversity at, Radford University. The tides have changed now, and it's pretty diverse now, but at the time it wasn't really. So I don't know. That's just tricky to navigate. I'm interested if you have thoughts about that.
I do, but I like, for sure don't have answers because I understand the double-edged sword thing. So, like, the book we just finished discussing, Color of Compromise, which I've talked a lot about, and we just finished discussing that this semester with our staff team, with doing campus ministry. But what the author Jamar Tisby ends with, and I'm just applying this to, I think I kind of apply this in general to life with this in these conversations, but he put it so succinctly. He just wants his readers, and specifically Christians and white Christians, to commit to, oh my gosh, I'm going to butcher it. Now I'm on the spot. Critical engagement versus reflexive rejection. So critical engagement versus reflexive rejection. And that's what I would apply here, meaning, like, when I was talking about my experience, with the promotional stuff. So I get it. Like, you want to be, like, how do you be genuine? Like, it seems like no one will be happy. It's just like, well, if I don't put the token Asian person or token black person on the literature, then it's just perpetuating and we're just an all-white school or institution. But if I put the token, big 15-foot poster of the Asian grad student, then we're good to go. And then people see that, oh, there are other people of color here. But then, and I've thought about this a lot, but then, is that it's not false advertising, but is it like giving off a false perception for the Asian people that would see that and then come and be like, was that the only one?
Yes.
So now where's everyone else? So like, I don't know, but I think the critical engagement is like, okay, but this is where we are all at as humans and as people. What do we do about it? And it's not an overnight fix, but I think we just have to critically engage and understand the problems. And I think so often it's easy to be like, well, there's no winning, there's no way to win, so screw it. And we're just going to do what's easy, which at different times that can be like right now with woke culture, it can be easy to err on the side of overcompensating and just who cares if it looks like a false perception. Let's just put all the people of color on there. That's what people want.
Right.
Or the other side of things, like, who cares? Nothing's going to change. And let's just not prioritize that at all and keep all the white people on all the brochures and not put a false foot forward. And so I just think that because of power struggle, if we don't critically engage, it's always going to be at the expense of people of color because of power structures. I don't have that data, but like Radford is where we're at, where we work and do ministry, and then where I graduated with both my degrees is a great example because, I teach there now, and when we were students, undergrad, not diverse at all, really, and they've done a lot of initiatives to change that. And everyone's never going to be happy. Like, everyone is not happy by any means now. But I'll just say, from strictly a standpoint of looking at my rosters each semester, my who's in my classes, people of color make up the majority of the classrooms now, and that is like, I never would have thought that would happen 8 years ago. Yeah. But that's literally happening, and I don't. At first couple years, I was like, whoa, I'm like, that's cool. Like, I'm getting lucky that,
I'm getting classes that I'm excited to teach.
Yeah, it's a privilege to
that I'm getting
be a part of
diversity.
This change. And now it's like 5 years later, I'm like, that happens all the time and increasingly more. And I love it. And so I don't know if it has to do with the advertising or how much, like, what has gone into everything. I don't know all the outcomes or why it's happened, but
well, there's a lot with the initiatives for first generation college students too.
Yeah,
that's like Radford's big thing now.
Right, and so it's connected. But I'm proud of where they've come because there's a lot of different elements to break down with that too. Because first generation, there's a ton of first generation students, but that can be people of color in impoverished communities, but it's also, we're in Southwest Virginia, that's plenty of
a lot of local people
who are first generation and white. So it could also be easy to just focus on the area and say, oh, well, we care about first generation students and still not care about diversity and multi-ethnicity. And so I don't know, I say all that to say, like, those are my thoughts, but I don't know how everything should come to fruition in my ideal world.
Yeah.
I do have more concrete answers for some other stuff, but for that one, it's just a thing to think about. Again, I can't get critical engagement versus reflexive rejection out of my mind from what we read from Jamar Tisby, because I think that's just really, really helpful of just, we need to, this work isn't easy. And it takes time, and it takes some hard conversations and thought. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's good because there isn't an answer to that. I think we really want there to be an answer, like a black and white answer to things of like, well, you should do this, you shouldn't do this, and that's how you succeed. But yeah, it is the heart. Yeah, the heart of it, which is why it's so easy with like big administrations and corporations and schools and churches to see right through it when it's not coming from the heart, because it does feel false and it feels empty. And yeah, there's certainly like overcorrection happening, and there's also like just nobody is gonna be happy, but that's also part of the work too, is that you can have the right heart about it and still get it wrong. You can have the right heart about it and get it right and still have people who think you didn't do enough, and that's just part of the work. So, I don't know. Interesting to think about. I didn't mean to go on that tangent. Okay, so a few years after we got married, you had a pretty major identity shift, in claiming your Asianness and being Korean in a way that was different than you had done before that. Like in college, growing up, there was something different happening in you. So do you know what prompted that? What series of things prompted that?
Yeah, so I mean, being involved with college ministry like we were through college, there were some similar cultural, relational experiences as in high school. So it wasn't super different in the sense of, I'm not saying that in a cynical way. It's just, it was the similar culture. And I chose it because it's my culture and what I grew up in. But I remember early on, even early marriage, like you said, actually I'll rewind to college. I mean, even then I remember, and I've shared this with our good friends too, but I would still hear offhanded comments. You know, I was one of 2 and 3 at any given time of Asian people involved with campus ministry that we were with crew and stuff. And it was, people knew that. Like, people were like, oh, it's just how people talked about it. Like, even when we started dating, it's like, oh, you date one of the Asian guys, and one of our friends dated the other Asian guy. It was just like, just how we talk about it, and is othering. Like, that is, like, that you don't need to say that. And I'm not trying to be, I know, again, can be a lose-lose with, like, well, what do I not want to, like, would I not describe you as Asian if to somebody who doesn't know you, if you're like in a room of 100 people or something? Like, I don't know, but it's the othering language of like having to explain to somebody, you know, about, you shared this even in your personal experience with us dating, of like being conditioned to explain like, oh, he's Asian, like when you're explaining who I was. And just that language that's is just, I don't know, people don't like to hear, but is tied into racist narratives, even if it's not an egregious, like, racist thing, seemingly. But I would have friends, you know, if I would eat sushi, which I love sushi, and I love Chinese food, on campus, I'd have friends that would say, you know, oh, of course you like sushi, or of course you're eating sushi, or whatever. And offhanded comments, again, not thinking it meant anything, but that started to bother me. And again, this is, you know, I'm an adult-ish, I'm in college, and so I'm understanding a little more of like, okay, this bothers me. These things are starting to build up, all the way from, you know, the comment from my 4th grade friend or something about being chosen for the promotional materials just because of what it looked like, to, of course, you're, you know, so it's those things that kind of started to compile up and forced me to deconstruct myself and unpack of like, okay, why does this bother me? That person's not a mean person, but that offends me. But I didn't understand why, but I knew I needed to figure it out. And so, I mean, I did, because it's just a misunderstanding of race and ethnicity that you would say something like that to somebody, and it's an othering, and it's a putting down of somebody, really. So I would hear kind of comments like that. I would hear like video game comments, like, or academic comments, stuff like that, of like, oh, how are you not like a math
major
wizard? Or when we play ping pong, I would hear jokes when I walked into the game room, like, oh, shoot, an Asian person. And just like, of course, we've overcompensated nowadays, so everyone's like, oh my gosh, that's horrible. But that was just normal. Like, it really wasn't. It would both offend me and feel like I wouldn't be surprised at all because I just heard that my whole life. I also grew up playing ice hockey. That's the place where I heard the overt stuff.
Yeah.
So very different. But anyway, I'll continue to go off on tangents even when I'm not hosting. But yeah, I think the thing you're probably referring to or asking about with a few years into marriage, what kind of really catapulted me into feeling like I had to press into my identity and speaking up and out about race issues is what happened in Charlottesville, I think 2017, with the white nationalists coming out and protesting the taking down of the statue, Robert E. Lee statue, I think, in Charlottesville. And then the woman was killed when the car was driven into the crowd. And then President Trump saying, oh, well, there were good people on both sides, and making that, I think a pretty insensitive comment. But then it wasn't just that. It was the collective response by those around me collectively. And what I mean collectively is like Christians and the church, and just it felt very weighty. And this is only a year into his presidency, which already felt extremely heavy. And I was never, I'm still not, but I was never political or identified really politically heavily with one side or the other necessarily. I mean, at different times, yes, but it was already a heavy atmosphere. And the collective response to Charlottesville by my culture, I guess, just really bothered me. And it wasn't that it was a disagreement, like, oh, they don't agree with my principles or my thoughts. It was a humane thing. And I was shook and disoriented because, like you said, throwing in the Christian element, what Christianity stands for, even if you don't know much about Christianity, I think bare bones you would know that, Christians should be good, kind, caring people for others. And the collective response, too much of the collective response, because I don't want to say everybody, because it wasn't everybody, but too much of the collective response was apathy, or even worse, defense of a comment like President Trump's at the time. And so... Or
of the people
or of the protesting
the statue being taken down.
Yes, and backing up that it shouldn't be taken down and that it was wrong to, taking that side, which it might even be another conversation because that's a whole nother layer. But
it is.
For me, since you said the personal element, it was eye-opening because I just saw an urgency to wake up, I guess, because I think I was living a lot in the side of, sure, there's bad Christians out there, but my people, my communities are equipped. We know how to respond to any of this stuff. We will be the first people to understand how to speak into this stuff and take the side of justice and the oppressed, and just so I have nothing to worry about. And if and when that ever happens, anything like a Charlottesville would happen, then I think just in my mind, I pictured, we're good. I'm in the good group of Christians. And seeing the collective response was just disheartening, and I started to feel very insecure. And I was like, hold on, why is everyone objectively not up in arms about this? And I don't mean that in a political way. I don't mean that why doesn't everyone have the answers? But I just mean why am I having to explain myself to so many people of why this is really hurtful? Why are my black friends and I and other people of color, friends of color, the few of us in our community, the same Christian community, crying and talking to each other about the climate that's going on, and our white friends collectively, not everybody, I have individuals that got it, but collectively our white Christian circles have deer in the headlights looks. I'm not saying we're completely opposed somewhere, but deer in the headlights looks of whoa, how do I keep the peace, or how do I, not say anything, or how do I say the right thing? And
or how do I not address it at all and just like wait for it to pass?
And so
yeah,
all of that was, again, it was trying to emphasize the collective response, because I think that's just important for at least this conversation. So it prompted me to, again, not overcompensate, but think about my identity, because, again, everyone can see what I look like who sees me as an Asian man. Like, people don't know who don't know me, who I am or what I'm like. Mm-hmm. And so, like, a lot of people might think of me as like, well, you're adopted, you grew up, we know what culture you grew up in, like, stop. I think it'd be easy to be like, you can't claim to experience the same thing that someone who immigrated here 2 years ago is your same age, like, or someone who's older, like 50s or 60s, and Asian experiences. And that's for sure true. I don't experience the same things as those people, but I would still experience similar things as them easily, because we look the same. And so, and there's a lot intertwined with that. And so anyway, really hard not to go off on tangents with all this stuff, but that was the bigger thing that I think happened. That was just like, all right, I can't unsee what's happening. I don't know what to do, but I know I can't. I'm not going to move forward and go back to ever being the same. It's just like, it's impossible, and it would be wrong for me personally, and then for my friends and the people I care about, and just as a Christian, we're mentioning Christianity and our faith, and I believe that Jesus cares about the oppressed and cares about these issues as well.
He moves towards the marginalized.
Yes. And so, again, I don't have all the answers, but I knew that the collective non-moving towards the marginalized in this example was not good. Yeah. And I knew something needed to change personally and collectively, if I had anything to say about it, really.
Yeah, I think, I was certainly thinking of that. I think that was kind of like you said, kind of the point of no return of like, we have to live our lives in a way that really cares about this. I mean, I was slower on the uptake because I could put it away because I don't experience anything because of the way I look. So I was also thinking, though, about, I think the slow roll right before that was that we had Ollie, and you were starting to have questions about, like, okay, what is my heritage, and how do we explain this to our kids in a way that makes them feel proud instead of insecure, what's my medical history, and just like simple questions like that kind of prompted a lot more. And I think there was, you were starting to see and pass along to me, thankfully, a lot of the stuff, like police brutality stuff that was going on too, in some of the bigger cases. And so, when Charlottesville happened, it was kind of like everything had kind of compiled into a moment of clear awareness. Okay, also, this isn't a question, but I'm interested. I think in college, I remember having that conversation in college where you were asking me, like, oh, if you describe who I am in like a room, at our college ministry, like, how do you describe me? Yeah. And I was like, say that you're Asian. And we had the same conversation where you were like, well, you don't have to say that I'm Asian. And I was
what did I say then? Because I don't.
No, yeah, because, I'm interested to see what you're going to say now. Yeah. Because you said, well, you don't have to say that I'm Asian. I was like, I guess I don't. That's just a very clear descriptor of who you are. That's like the fastest way for someone to identify you visually, sadly, because there were no other Asian men around, really. So it was easy to describe who you were. So I'm sure I know there was some of my own ignorance. I remember us having a conversation about it, but I would say pretty confidently that you would have way less of an insecurity or a problem with being described as an Asian man now than you did in college. Like, it wouldn't trigger, bother,
Yeah, I think
prompt
that's right.
thoughts in the same way now that it did then.
Yeah, I'm sure that at that time I was in a different place and overcompensating probably, and I think it is a good descriptor. Like, I agree that it is a good descriptor. And
Yeah, it doesn't say everything about you in any
Right.
way.
I think it probably came out of pain of saying,
Yeah.
like, well, you don't have to say that
Yeah,
because of the token Asian guy.
right,
Or token just non-white person.
right.
In all the rooms I've grown up in.
Which I didn't understand.
Right, and
That you
so-
were walking into rooms all the time where you were the only person who looked like you.
And so I was just erring on the side of not wanting to be referred to as that.
Yeah,
as, like-
as the Asian guy.
Which I would have known this back then too, but not that you were saying, like many others would be like, oh, he's the Asian guy. Go find him.
Right.
Is much different than saying, you know, go look for him. I don't know, his same as Dave's got dark hair, he's Asian, or something like that would be different than saying, like, he's the Asian guy. 'Cause
Right.
It sounds a lot more flippant and degrading to say it the latter way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, now for sure would have much more of a different response. But again, this is the critical engagement, critical thinking piece. I think about that myself when I describe my other friends of color who are in a room in the same
Yeah.
situation. Like, I don't just say he's the black guy. Like, and I'm unlearning that natural tendency to
Yeah.
do something like that. But sometimes I'm like, I mean, that's fine, you know. He's black, but also just being aware of how to, just even getting used to not thinking of them or communicating that that's all they are
Right.
to the person I'm talking to, like you kind of just said. And it just, we're people, like, we can pick up on that. And again, I think if you're conditioning yourself to see people beyond that, then you're not going to say things in offensive ways nearly as often.
Or that, like, put somebody into a stereotype.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Which I keep citing my own podcast, but I'm really citing the guests I've had on because they're all fantastic. Like, they're all so good and informative. But Mark Samudre, our good friend who was on, I think, like episode 4 or something really early, just had, I mean, phenomenal insight into experiencing this in our friend group and in college and his own family. And, well, not in his own family, but similar experiences between him and his brothers and just his upbringing. He had so much to say about this that was very helpful
Yeah.
in navigating being the, you know, token brown person in the rooms he grew up in, away from his friends at least. 'Cause he had a very diverse group away from our college friend group. But yeah, you guys should check out that one.
I like that one. I love Mark. Hi, Mark. Hopefully those were the biggest questions. You might need to cut it down a little. As the host, I feel like I can tell you to be a little
Where are
bit
we at?
more
Oh,
concise.
man, yeah, we're at an hour.
I've only
Yours was
asked
the
3
longest.
questions and I have 10.
Yours was the longest one in the past, so.
Well, that's because both of us were talking and we like to chat. Okay.
I don't have any advertisements to take a break, so we just got to keep going.
Okay. This is random. I just thought of it, but you've been pretty apathetic basically your whole life about visiting South Korea until very recently. So yeah, I was just wondering, like, what, not that we have any concrete plans, that would be awesome to visit, but yeah, that's where you were born, and yeah, you've never been back since then, and you've felt pretty apathetic until the last couple years. So I was wondering, like, when you think about potentially going there at some point in your life, like, what feels scary and then what feels exciting?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so I won't speak for all adoptees by any means. We have a lot of friends that have adopted, and I've as I've gotten older, met a handful of adult adoptees in our last few years, and
Who are transracially adopted,
adoptees. Yeah, and I never grew up knowing anybody with a similar story as me, not just other Asian people, but no one who had a similar story as me. And so that was obviously like a level of, I don't know if trauma is too strong a word, but baggage I like carry of just not being able to identify fully with anybody. So when you say apathy, I think, so the traditional view of adoption is like a savior complex, in my opinion, of like, I spent most of my life navigating that of like, oh, I should just be, aren't you just thankful that you got to grow up in America and you were adopted and got saved by, you know, your parents. I had great parents. I love my parents. They listen to this, so they, like, I love my parents. They're great parents and are great parents. But I wasn't, anyway, I wasn't, I don't think, and I've had this conversation with both my parents, but maybe adoptee parents weren't as equipped to navigate as well as the conversations that many are now with the racial baggage that transracial adoptees grow up with, and the importance of being around others that identify with their stories and whatnot. But at the same time, I also didn't grow up feeling, and I still don't, which is what I'm getting to, like, I did not grow up feeling like I have a huge hole in my life. Like, my parents are my parents. That's all I've known, just like anybody who has known their parents since they're a baby. I don't, and still don't, have this hole of like, I'm not a complete person until I meet my birth family. I also think that that's fine when people do, and that's my point of like, it's not just like any people group. We're not adoptees aren't a monolithic thinking group. Like, any way you feel about your adoption story is valid, and I'm not obligated to feel thankful. I am, but I'm also, that doesn't mean that I should just be thankful and not care that I have a story that I wasn't a part of consciously, but I have a story of being given up as a baby to be adopted, and I don't know like hardly anything about that story. So now I have become more interested for reasons like we have kids. I'd like to understand maybe more genetics and health history. But also, just as I've gotten older, I care more about finding out about my birth family to find out, and I don't think I'll know maybe emotionally why that is until maybe I actually do it. It's not this, like you said, we don't have concrete plans. It's not like oh my gosh, I can't think about anything else until we do this. But it is something that I'm not shut off to anymore. Yeah. And I don't think I was shut off in a sense of like, I'll never do that. Like, screw like my birth mom for giving me up. I've never felt like that either. I've just been like, I don't know. Like, I am fine. But I know there's probably more to it. And again, I'd be interested to know like what other kind of blood relatives, or, I mean, I grew up an only child. Like, if I had blood siblings around somewhere, like all that would be just really crazy to find out. And there are ways I can go about doing that, I think. But so yeah, we're in like super, super, super preliminary thoughts and stages of figuring out if that's even going to be something we're going to do. But yeah, and then raising our two beautiful mixed kids plays into it too, because when we had Ollie, which you mentioned, I remember, I mean, I don't know if it was right before we had him, but it was well into your pregnancy with him. But I was like, or maybe it was after we had him, I can't remember, you might remember better, but I was like, Ollie is the first person I met that I shared blood with. Yeah. It was just a heavy emotional thing to think about. Yeah. Because I've never met someone that I share genetics with.
Yeah, that you could say, oh, they have your eyes, or they have your smile, or they have, you know.
Yeah, so as beauty, that's a great example. So, like, as beautiful as adoption is, like, again, like, I love my parents and love all the story that I have as an adoptee. There's still pain to not experience normal stuff that people who aren't adopted just probably, for the most part, probably take for granted, like, because it's just normal. Like, I've never been able to say, like, oh, I have my dad's eyes, or like build, or
right,
my mom's facial structure, something like that. Like, it's just no one could say that for obvious reasons. So
yeah, and there's we see that even still with the kids and like grandparents of like on my side of the family. We get lots of comments like, oh, they look just, my Amelia looked just like my sister when she was a baby, or my dad loves to talk about how they might look like him because he loves having grandkids. So there's just like a conversation there. But on your side of the family, there's still even like a generation down the line. Mm-hmm. And it's not, you're allowed to be thankful and still have complicated feelings about adoption. So that actually wasn't what I was thinking about at all when I asked your question, but that is classic to the podcast and normal conversations that we have.
What were you thinking about?
I was thinking about just like what you've talked... Oh, the wire. No. What you've talked about and experienced with... being Asian, but not identifying culturally South Korean, and how that can be quite painful sometimes too. Or like just confusing. Like we've talked about with South Korea, like they're like, now you're feeling a little bit more connected of like, that would be really cool to get to experience being there. But you've talked about some scariness of being there, being somewhere kind of finally where almost everyone around you looks like you, but knowing that you don't speak the language or know the culture, and that people might assume that you do.
I think I forgot that part of the question. You did ask that. I think that it would be way less painful now because I think I'm just more equipped to handle that awkwardness. Like, I think it would feel more awkward than painful if I think about it right now. I think going back would be therapeutic just to see where I was born. And I think that seeing all these people that look like me wouldn't be as meaningful as just the therapeutic thing of seeing where I was born. And I think that there would just be a natural, like, I don't know, I feel like it'd be healing. And there would just be a sweetness to whatever I would experience there. For sure, I'm sure it would feel amazing to be around all Korean people. But the fear element, I think, would be just the awkwardness of, like, I've never been there. I'm not culturally South Korean.
Right, yeah.
Don't know very much about it. Obviously don't speak the language. And so I think if I was much younger, like 10, 15 years ago, it would have been a lot more shame, and I would have just felt super insecure. Like, I think that would be part of the reason I was shut off for sure. Of like, that would be so weird. Like, I would never want to do that.
Because you maybe didn't, like, you wouldn't have described yourself as Asian. Wouldn't have claimed that in the same way that you do now, in a proud way.
Right. I always checked the box for Asian. Like, I always did that. I always knew that, but not with more shame attached to it until later in life.
Yeah.
So now it's much easier to do that. But that would be the fear of like not, and what I've navigated my whole life of not being Asian enough, but I'm also not white, or friends saying, "Oh, I don't think of you as Asian. I just think of you as white." Mm-hmm. Stuff like that. So I think it's much more healing to identify with people like other transracial adoptees, which I don't know hardly any, but just recently when I've had the blessing of meeting people who have just inadvertently had this similar stories, I've been like, oh my gosh, so like we've sat and talked for a long time, and so that's been really cool. And then just in these last few years, I've just become much closer friends to my other friends who are other people of color, kind of naturally, but also out of, I don't know, necessity, and it's just been therapeutic. And I guess we'll get into some about the podcast, but even doing the podcast, like, has been just extremely therapeutic to me personally, and it's been the opposite of draining, really, because I know early on I would get done recording and you would say, are you dead now? And I'm like, no, like, I'm energized, because it's been just really therapeutic and comforting to identify with other men and women of color in ways that I hadn't for a long time. And so I would say that's probably where I would feel most seen. And then I wouldn't necessarily know what to expect with going back to South Korea, but yeah, it's kind of, there's a lot of layers, obviously, to that.
All right. What is encouraging to you and scary to you about raising mixed race children?
Man, both. I feel like I'm in the middle with both. Scary. Yeah, I think I just don't want them to experience what I experienced growing up. And that sounds really like, oh man, I had a terrible life, but it's just connected to what I've already talked about growing up. Of like I don't want them to experience, just like any parent doesn't want their kid to experience any kind of like bullying or anything that hurts their feelings, anything like that. I don't want my kids to experience any kind of microaggression. Yeah. Which has already happened, but I don't want that. I just don't want that to happen. And so that's, I mean, scary, because I know it can be really lonely, and yeah, just like anything happening to a kid, I don't want that to happen. So that's scary. And I think the scary element is like, I think I assume it will happen. Although with our kids, I think they'll experience, I know they'll experience things differently because they're mixed. And so they'll be looked at in a way, because of either white adjacency or just what they look like being mixed, they'll experience different kinds of racism. Like, they'll be looked at as exotic, like mixed, and what's the word? Fetishized.
Yeah. It's a gross word, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a gross word, but fetishized because they're exotic, and people are obsessed with mixed kids and mixed people. And I think my hope is that will progress, and that won't be such a thing as they get older. But they'll get the question, like, what are you? More so than I did. Yeah. And not the overt Asian stuff. But that can also build up and be traumatic. So I don't want them to get that, but I think they probably will. Like what are you? Like, meaning like, you're clearly not fully white. So like, what are you? But I don't think I think they're going to be like white passing enough that they won't get the like slanted eye joking that I experienced, that any Asian person experiences in America. Pretty confident to say that that's true. Or just other like Asian slurs and stuff. I don't think they'll get that kind of stuff. So that's, I guess, what I would be most scared about. But you really helped me like understand, because I think I come from a much more cynical place with like, oh, we gotta prepare them. They're going to definitely experience that like tomorrow. So like, let's just prepare them for the worst. And I think that's a little much. We need to, like, we have the luxury of understanding a little more, sending them into the world, and we also don't want them to have that mentality all the time. Yeah. Of just expecting it. And so I think
and like sorting through what is genuine, especially with the age our kids are, like what's genuine curiosity and what is a big conversation. Because Ollie will say things offhanded that sometimes you start to feel like, all right, here's the conversation, and you start to gear up, and sometimes it can be diffused by a simple like, why are you asking that? And there's usually not a nefarious reason or not something that somebody said to him. That's always our fear.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is hard, I would assume, for you to not project that onto them too. And we're
Yes.
already seeing that Ollie's having a different experience than you had when you were a kid.
Yeah. So, was the other side encouraged? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I'm encouraged because I think that he's much farther along than we were, and I'm not gonna pat us on the back, but I think we're doing an okay job at navigating that, and
we're trying at least.
We're trying.
Not at least as in other people aren't, but like
Yeah.
I'm saying that's the goal for us. We want to try.
Yeah, putting our best foot forward, and they seem like they're in a good. Well, Millie's really little, but Ollie's in a good spot with the conversations we've had, and his views on, I don't know, so far things he's brought up. And again, like, yeah, it's been helpful for us to talk, just us two,
Yeah.
about like our thoughts on all of this. So yeah.
He does think that I'm Asian.
He does think you're Asian, because we say, if there's an Asian character on a show or book or something, we'll make the point or when we make the points, to point them out. Look how he looks like Papa. He's Asian like you, Papa, and Millie. And he says, and you, Mama. So he doesn't quite understand that, but
And I go, nope. And then he goes, what are you? And I go, just white, bud. And then he looks back at the TV. So
yeah.
it's not as consequential to him as we often think it is. But, it's a building. Yeah, we talked about that a lot on our last episode, so I won't ask more about that for time's sake. Yeah, and then, well, I feel like you already answered my next one, so I'll just move on to podcast questions. You talked about when things really changed for you, as far as like kind of like getting in the game with these conversations instead of just taking in information, and that was 2017. But yeah, what made you start the podcast? Like, why did you do that? Why did you feel like that was the move? Just to be clear, you're unpaid for this. It's a time sacrifice in a lot of ways, and it's a lot of work, and it's still something that, feels like a worthy calling for you. So why is that?
Yeah, so I think I felt like these conversations that we're having on the podcast needed to be had, and I cared about people being able to also hear them. And mainly the latter, because they're already being had by me and many of the people that have already come on the podcast. And when I say need, meaning like I and some of the people have come on already, like we'd be part of either leading or participating in different circles in these racial groups or discussion groups, which sound great. And parts of them were the ones that I was involved with or led, and like some fruit and progress, I think, does come from those and has come for sure.
Yep. But
something, I think, as they kept going, one, a lot of times they became inconsistent for different reasons. Some would fall on me if I was leading them sometimes. But one thing that I just, after a while, I would just keep leaving those groups feeling like, I feel like everyone, many of the attendees would be white people, which is great. But leaving them, I would feel like, man, everyone's leaving, and it feels like it's like this really positive, like all this great, amazing stuff is happening in these groups. But I would always leave there feeling like, why don't I feel like that? And that's not a knock on like, oh man, everyone like is not agreeing with me or like understanding all the right elements. It was really more about the way the conversation was being had.
yeah.
So I would leave there feeling like, gosh, I feel like a bunch of white people just talked over me and my one or two other friends of color in the room who were really all there to have conversations with and about how to, really to learn from, a posture of learning. And for whatever reason, we would leave those conversations feeling like that wasn't really happening, that it became places for a lot of white tears and shame that would kind of usurp anything that like I had to say or
the discussion on a book.
And stuff that was just not super relevant or helpful. And anyway, but me and some other friends were having conversations that were along these lines, but they were just between us because that's just what we talk about normally, or maybe we're having to talk about out of necessity because of the, I don't know, current like racial and political climate. But I remember leaving those conversations after a while and feeling like, you know what, like this conversation that we just had, or that I just had with my buddy, that's what people need to hear. Not because we had anything amazing to say, but that's just like what I believe like our friends, actually probably our white friends, wanted to hear, but weren't able to get that out of a discussion group.
Mm-hmm. There's like an element that y'all could, sorry, see, now I'm talking over you.
Yeah, no.
There's an element of being able to, you guys could share honestly and vulnerably.
Yes.
Without feeling like somebody was going to be there to be defensive.
Yeah, so it was safe and informative, I think, because we don't have all the answers, but those are just the kind of things that are never going to happen in a panel or a discussion group, for the most part. And so,
especially if the makeup is majority white.
Yeah. And so I don't think all discussion groups are bad. I'm still in some. But I think our experience was not unique, and that was just really common, especially at the time. And I knew that for me, again, something needed to change. I wasn't just going to say, oh, well, we tried. I knew something needed to change. But I didn't know. Again, I did not know what to do. So it kind of steps back from those discussion groups and facilitating that kind of stuff, because I felt like it was not being helpful, if I'm honest. And then just through a lot of workshopping different ideas between me and a couple friends, like we're just like, well, should we do this? Like, what would you think about this? Or we had a lot of stupid ideas, which don't go off in those tangents. But podcasting just, everyone has a podcast now. They've blown up. So they were big then. There's only been a year, but they've been big for a while now. But it just made sense to me because I would not consider public speaking a gift I have. But this is perfect because it's kind of public speaking without an audience. And it's also not live, so we can record it. So it's like a lot of the pressure elements are taken away that I would struggle with. And I do feel like I knew that I could have a good conversation with, I think I can have conversations with a lot of different people wherever they're coming from. I do think like that is one of my strengths. And so I was like, okay, I think podcasting would be a good or good avenue to have these kind of discussions on. And so that's essentially why I did it. And I wanted it to be a place where it was educational for allies and white people, and our circles and communities were involved in. But then also that it was never at the expense of people of color. So the flip side, that people of color felt seen and heard by what they listened to in the conversations I am facilitating. And obviously I haven't had anybody tell me that they hated it or something, but the feedback I've gotten, I'm encouraged to say, has been that, especially from my friends of color, who feel like oh man, they love what like one of our guests said, and just feel like seen and heard and empowered by the conversations we're having. And then also love from one of our good friends who's white and even does ministry, said early on, he's like, I didn't tell him this, or I didn't tell him this is what I would hope. But he said, man, like I can't describe it, but I feel like I'm like a fly on the wall to like a conversation when I listen to the podcast, and it's really helpful. And I love hearing that because I'm like, that's what I want it to be, like that you're listening into almost a private conversation, not in a creepy way, but a good way. That's helpful. And I also felt like I had realistic expectations of it. Like I didn't think it'd be a waste of time because I knew people would listen, but it's not like I was like, this is going to be huge. And I didn't want it to be. I knew that I knew enough people, and we have like an eclectic group of circles that we're in our life. And I knew that enough people would listen that it would be worth it. And I also knew that I had enough people that would come on that were acquaintances and good friends, a mix, that I was just confident would care about coming on and also feel empowered by coming on. And so I take who I bring on and the conversations we have really seriously. And I want it to be an honor to come on, not because the podcast is amazing or anything, but I want it to be like just an intentional, like we're intentionally talking about things, and I'm intentionally picking or asking people to come on to talk about certain topics, and not just, let me think about the next Black friend that I've talked to once before that I can just get on and talk about something random because they're Black or Asian or something. It's like, no, like I also try not to be somebody I'm not. Like I don't have someone come on, or I don't give any kind of expert advice or thoughts on something that I know someone is an expert on and could come on. So like I've started to learn a lot about the importance of mental health and the I can't think of the word, justice system. I am in no way an expert at that. Like I just started understanding more about that. So I had Brooke come on, and that's her field, and she's obviously extremely knowledgeable about it, not just because she has degrees, but that's her job. She's a Black woman and just knows her stuff. And I can say that about everybody I've had come on. It's been really intentional. And, I don't know if I'm answering more questions than you're going to ask.
You answered 3 in a row.
Perfect.
But that's great. The next one's just looking forward. And it's encouraging because, the goals that you set were quite small and quite big at the same time. It wasn't for a certain number of people to listen, but it was for people to feel seen and heard, and that's happening. And another cool thing that has happened is that, I've learned a ton, but I do feel like we've gotten a lot of feedback from our friends who are white who've talked about just things that they haven't thought about before, and hearing it getting brought up on the podcast and saying that same thing of like, I don't know how I would have heard this in another atmosphere, and it was good to hear it this way. And so that's been cool.
Yeah, that's been super encouraging.
Yeah. And then my last question was just, what are you excited about for Racially Speaking in the next year?
Yeah. I'm excited that, it's, that we have an established audience on the podcast. Like it's been consistent, hasn't dwindled, and encouraged by the feedback I've gotten, and also just encouraged that I have a slew of people that ready to come on to have some really cool conversations.
Yeah.
And it's been a cool creative outlet. I don't consider myself a very creative person, but it's been creative just from everything, learning how to do a podcast along the way. And like you've been at the forefront of seeing errors and seeing me, not because you pick it apart, but you see me, realize my own errors and be like, oh gosh.
Got to take it down, put it back up again.
Yep. So that has been really fun. Maybe not in the moment, but in hindsight, it's been a fun process.
Yeah.
I'm excited moving forward just because I'm keeping going with it, and it's fun, and I think I'm excited to grow different elements of it. From the beginning, I've also really taken pride and been thankful and honored to work with people I know from the beginning, like Ashley and Zach Bush. Like Zach is one of the main people who I workshopped, like practiced recording a podcast with, and just talked to him more than anybody in the last couple of years about many of the things we talk about on the podcast. And we become very, very great friends. And with him, and then his wife Ashley, who's also been on, she created the logo and did the artwork. And so I'm thankful that like it's almost like a little mini team that was established from the beginning, that feels personal. There's people that are bought in. It's not like I had to reach out to some random graphic designer. It's like, someone's bought into at the ground level to the podcast. And then Dylan Dent, who he wrote the music. He's my friend. Like I know him, and it's his music. And he was an amazing guest as well. So that's just really, it's just been really fun and creative. And yeah, so looking forward. You guys can be on the look for some new music coming from Dylan on the podcast. That I'm going to switch it up a little bit. He's like putting more and more stuff out. Yeah, I know. Is that a downer to switch off from the? I do love the music currently, but
I like it. That was news to me. You've been keeping secrets.
Well, maybe we'll edit this part out. Either way, we're sticking with Dylan. He's my guy. Possibly look out for new music, and then I'm excited to bring on our two-time guest and a good friend, John Mark Walker. Bringing him on in a more consistent role, with kind of doing a co-hosting role on here with me. So yeah, I'm excited to do that. That's going to be kind of a new element to the podcast. We'll still have plenty of amazing guests, like I've already said, come on the show, but I'm excited to have kind of a consistent element to have him on to bounce stuff off of, and vice versa. So 2022, be looking for those.
It's 2022.
What's that?
I just said, yikes, 2022.
Oh, yikes, 2022. Those are kind of some things you can be looking for. And then some other hopes and dreams for the podcast would be that it eventually, and I don't know a timetable for this, would be something that is action-oriented beyond conversation. But those are layers that still need to be ironed out, but would, in other ways, uplift not only the people that come on the podcast, but communities and people that we even are talking about. So that's kind of down the road, but I'm excited about where it's at, and it's been really fun.
Yeah, proud of you, baby.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was your last one?
That was my last one. I mean, it's been a bit. I do have rapid fire questions, though.
Oh my gosh, no way.
I'm amazing.
Wow.
They are.
NBA themed or Taylor Swift themed?
They're Caitlyn themed.
Caitlyn themed.
I just wanted to be funny, so here's my rapid fire questions.
This is gonna be awesome.
We'll see. All right, Jobin, are you ready?
I think. Yes.
All right.
That wasn't rapid fire.
What is your favorite thing that I've convinced you was amazing?
Oh, Hamilton.
Hamilton. Okay. I have a very long history of swaying David to my interests on
It's true.
a myriad of things.
It's not even close. Hamilton's got to be.
Okay, it's Hamilton.
Yeah.
All right, next question. Broadway or rap?
Rap.
Okay, but the answer was Hamilton. To that question, the answer is Hamilton. Broadway or rap, you say Hamilton. So, there we go.
Okay.
First two questions.
I see.
I see. Millie or Ollie?
Did you say that because you would hate if I asked you something like that?
No, I just thought it was funny. I'm very funny.
What context?
But what do you like? What's one fun thing about each of them right now that you love?
I mean, it's almost unfair to ask that, but so I'll preface it with Ollie. Can you get my back and say we don't pressure them to do anything?
Oh, yeah, no.
So we're not pressuring them to do anything, right?
He loves everything.
Right, and we want them to come into their own, do what they love, not what we would prefer them to love. But he just started playing basketball, and he loves it, right? I mean, he loves it.
Victory of victories. Ollie loves basketball.
He loves it. So that I'm helping me and one of his buddies' dads are coaching the team, and it's amazing. They run around like crazy.
Ollie is so good at having
like
hands
it's a football.
up.
Yeah. He's a defensive
Hands up for defense.
Powerhouse.
No matter where the ball is, his hands are up. He's ready.
He will pick you up full court, even if the entire other team's on the other side. He'll pick you up. But
That's true.
That's exciting for him and me. And just been really fun to watch. And Millie, she's just in prime 2-year-old, almost 3, cutest stage. And I feel like she's also loves, maybe not loves everything, but.
No, she does not.
Okay, she does not love everything.
She is opinionated right now.
I think we have I won't say hate, but love-hate relationship, me and her right now. Because she's like the cutest, loves cuddling, but she's been giving me.
She's been giving you the business lately.
She's giving me the business.
Yes, she has.
So I guess that is kind of a cute thing. I mean, she's like screaming at me.
She wants to tell you what to do.
She does tell me what to do.
Yeah. Meanwhile, my favorite thing is that she nuzzles me like she's a kitten.
Yeah. And her laugh.
Oh, yeah, she invented a new laugh today.
Yep.
It's amazing. All right, next one. Basketball or basketball?
Tough. Basketball.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Why did you drink all of my hot chocolate when we first met each other and you were a stranger?
I thought it'd be cool.
When was our first official date, and was it before or after we started dating? See?
Starbucks.
I was silly. No, you said that intentionally wasn't a date.
No. Oh, gosh. I thought you promised you weren't going to bring all this up.
I said I wasn't going to bring it up on the podcast, but I don't count the rapid fire as part of it. So, no, I just asked him to be funny,
you were
though.
Wrong. Yeah.
If you see David in person, you can ask him about how we started dating. And we can laugh and laugh. And
we can all laugh.
We can all laugh and be amazed and thankful that here we are. Serious ones. What's your favorite book you've read this year?
Oh, man. I haven't read that many books this year. I don't think. I don't want to sound lame, but one of the most helpful books is Jamar Tisby's The Color of Compromise. And I've now read it twice because I led a discussion with our staff team on it. And it's just really good and honest and helpful at the same time in a condemning way, if that makes sense. And it's just refreshing to hear that kind of perspective.
All right, last one. What's something that has been comforting you about the character of Jesus in the Bible?
Just that he understands and is close to the lowly and is gentle and lowly. I'm reading that right now or listening to it. Book by, is it Dane Ortland? I think that's the author. It's just comforting to know that Jesus is not looking down and upset with me or anything like I'm going through. He also empathizes. I feel that's a heavy question to
I was
even end on. But
thinking more of I mean, that's I think it bleeds into this, but how, what about who Jesus is encourages you as we're having these conversations about ethnicity and race and how people look at each other?
Yeah. Just that I think the most encouraging is that he created me and created us, and he understands all these things we're talking about more than anyone. Mm-hmm. He understands injustice in every level more than anybody, any author, any movie, or any like historical figure or activist or anyone that we can think of. And so ultimately, like, for me, that's the foundation of all of these conversations. Mm-hmm. And so it's just, it's comforting to know that he experienced the biggest, most unjust act of all time. And so that's comforting, because when it seems very like daunting and like there's no end, I know that he's who my faith is in, mm-hmm. and is the foundation to all this. So yeah, and that's what fuels any advocacy or vulnerability or boldness. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for having me host your podcast. I was going to say thanks for coming on my podcast. You should have said that.
I really am quite proud of you, baby. You've put a lot of work and a lot of sacrifice and late nights and early mornings and kids' nap times where you could have done anything else.
It's true.
Into this and just pursued something that I wasn't even very initially encouraging of. And it's doing exactly what you wanted it to do, and makes me very happy and very proud.
Love you.
Yeah, love you.
Do you want to do the outro and credits?
Don't know what I'm supposed to say, so nope. I listen. I'm a listener.
I know. I
just want you to know that I listen all the way to the end.
I'm going to start putting little Easter eggs in there to see if you actually listen to the end. I 100%
listen all the way to the end, Jobin.
As always, thank you everyone for listening. This has been awesome. Thank you especially for everyone that's been listening since episode 1, coming along on these 20 episodes. And this journey or many journeys we've been going on, and excited to do more in 2022 with a couple of the changes we're making. So I'm excited. Credits. I'm almost forgetting what I'm supposed to say. As always, the podcast was created to elevate BIPOC voices and to educate anyone else who wants to listen and learn and grow with us. Our artwork was created by the great Ashley Bush, and the music you're listening to was, of course, written and produced by the also great Dylan Dent.